McLaren is playing down its chances for the 2023 Formula 1 season, revealing a new car that didn't look dramatically different to last year's tricky-to-drive machine. While it's not unusual for teams to manage expectations when they reveal a new car, even by those standards, the tone at McLaren was noticeably downbeat. The car, named the McLaren MCL60 to mark the 60th anniversary of the team, features some changes, and we'll get onto those in a moment. But while McLaren was never expecting to make major strides forward until its new wind tunnel, which will come online next year, can have an effect on the 2024 car, the fact it doesn't even appear confident of being able to win the midfield battle is telling. So why is the team so downbeat? At first glance, the MCL60 is very similar to the final specification of last year's car, but there is one significant change which follows the prevailing trend we've seen with the 2023 cars launched so far. This follows the course set by Red Bull last year, which isn't a huge surprise given how dominant the RB18 was in the second half of the season. Like Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Williams, McLaren has attempted to create the maximum space at the front of the side pods and the floor inlets. These feed the air into the powerful underfloor Venturi tunnels that generate so much of the downforce of these ground effect cars. This design conditions the airflow coming off the front of the car more aggressively and feeds it into the underfloor and around the side pods more effectively. That should create potential for a more consistently effective floor. And consistent downforce can be more valuable than peak downforce that's difficult to access. The launch car also features significant changes to the floor fences at the entrance of the Venturi tunnels, taking advantage of the space created. They feature a more stretched forward shape and appear to be a big change from last year's approach. These vanes at the front of the floor are crucial to optimizing the airflow that's fed into the underfloor and around the side pod. That's why it's such a focus of attention for every team this year. This also means there has been some repackaging of the internals of the side pods, but these are fundamentally similar to the direction McLaren gradually took with last year's car, notably with the upgrades introduced at the French and later Singapore Grand Prix. The side pods themselves are a gentle evolution of last year's McLaren, which follows the Red Bull trend with the downwash ramps feeding into the Coke bottle at the rear. But there is a tiny hint of Ferrari influence with the treatment of the upper surface of the side pod. Overall, it's very much following in the footsteps of the Red Bull RB18 though. The primary roll structure and the engine cover appear similar to last year's design. The same applies to floor edges and the front wing and nose, and we'll have to wait for testing to see if there's any significant changes in those areas. But as McLaren has stressed, the launch car is pretty much what we'll see in pre-season testing in Bahrain. Don't expect major fundamental changes. You'll also notice that the car features a bit more of McLaren's trademark papaya than last year's did during much of the season. That's because weight reduction means it's no longer having to shave off vital grams by stripping back quite so much paint. McLaren has promised a significant upgrade for around the fourth race of the season in Azerbaijan, and the tone given off at its launch on Monday gave the impression of a team expecting to make a slow start to the season. There was no grand expectation for McLaren to leap clear of the midfield and attack the top three teams this year because there are some lingering fundamental deficits holding it back. We've talked at length about the wait for a new wind tunnel and simulator at McLaren, which should finally be up and running this year. But as that will only start to feed into the 2024 car and then really make a difference in 2025, this year always felt like a bit of treading water for a team that has lost some upwards momentum. The surprising thing is it's sounding a little bit more negative than that though, at least for the start of the season. New McLaren team principal Andrea Stella admits that McLaren is not entirely happy with the launch car, and there was a lot of talk at the launch event about being realistic. This is despite the team being optimistic it has addressed pretty much all of the areas it wanted to prioritise from last year. These include obviously aerodynamics, which Stella rightly called the name of the game in Formula 1, but also more specific targets like how the car interacts with the tyres, which was a problem McLaren seemed to really suffer with last year. So why the relative negativity, and do we think it's legitimate or just a case of playing things down in pre-season? Ultimately, McLaren is playing catch-up after a slow start to the new technical regulations this time last year. It's been on the back foot not just against the Big Three, but also Alpine, which beat it to fourth in the championship in 2022. Stella says that McLaren was just a bit too late in identifying opportunities with some strong development areas last year, and it's not been able to capitalise on them fully for the MCL60 yet. While it's hard to determine exactly how far behind it is as a result, it suggests McLaren is at least starting the year with a more basic version of some key elements on this car. Though we might expect the launch car to evolve a reasonable amount by the time we see it run in Bahrain in testing, there's already talk of waiting for significant developments. Stella specifically said to expect these a couple of months into the season. Star driver Lando Norris still reckons McLaren can end the year best of the rest, but clearly the expectation at McLaren is that it will not be in that position in the beginning. Stella said that you need to be totally happy and totally at the top of what you can do to achieve your targets. McLaren's launch definitely left the impression this is not the case in Woking heading into 2023.